Artist on Record, your ultimate intimate conversation with your favorite artist. If it's your first time here, give us a thumbs up and subscribe. Hit the bell to be notified so you don't miss any other episodes. Don't touch that dial. It all starts now, kids. Welcome, everybody. I am Stefan ADIKA, and you are beautiful. In the hot seat, we have Michael Lockwood. He played with such artists like Carly Simon, Aimee Mann, Fiona Apple, and Susanna Hoffs of the Bangles. He's also a producer, musical director, filmed and TV composer, session guitarist, writer, and arranger. And you might maybe heard some of his music in Apple for the iMovie trailers or in memory. So next time your photos on your iPhone suggest a memory to you, you may well be listening to one of the soundtracks that Michael has written. I want to know the scene with Lions and Ghosts, how you guys first got together. How did you and Rick Parker, first of all, hook up with each other? That's what
okay. That's fair. So probably in 84, I'm thinking. I was, no, not 84. Maybe it was 82 or 3. I was playing in a bar band in Bakersfield, California, right? Country capital. And it was a winter break. I think it was around Christmas time. And this girl walked in, Casey Nicolai, who I had known. She was friends with other friends of mine. And she was dating Michael Murphy, the drummer for Lions and Ghosts. So Michael and I started talking, and he said, listen, I'm in this band. We were a 3-piece. We were kind of a mod band at the time. They were called Banner. And he said, we're looking to add another guitar player. Maybe you'd be interested. So I think he gave me a cassette tape of the demos. I heard it, and it was super. For me, it was like an original band, but it was very modern because there was a little bit of The Cure, and there was a lot of other sort of, elements that were happening at that time period. So I went and I auditioned. I went and auditioned at this rehearsal place where the Chili Peppers were rehearsing, all these different guys, and I sit down and play with these guys. And they're like, are you into it? I said, yeah, I'm into it. So that's where I met Rick, was that night. I had not met him before that. And I got to know all the guys, and at that time I wasn't living in Hollywood. So I moved down to Hollywood, started rehearsing with them and started playing. And I think I was in the band for a year or a year and a half before we got signed. It happened pretty quick. So it was right place, right time for all of that.
Did you guys have I'm not trying to get gossipy, but I'm a little Jewish. Did you guys have so I'm going to get gossipy. Did you get a falling out? Did anything happen there? Did you guys
Okay. I think since you're a musician, since you've been in bands.
Yeah.
I think that you can understand and relate to some of the things I'm about to say. So when, 4 young men get together in their early 20s, they're figuring themselves out individually, spiritually, emotionally, on every level. You're still growing a lot in your early 20s. And you shove 4 people together, either living together, rehearsing together, in a van together. It ends up being a lot like a marriage. Only you have 3 wives, not 1, right? And sometimes in bands, I've often noticed that people pair up, or like just because they get along better or whatever it was. And in Lions and Ghosts, it was all very work related, but we also played together. And when I mean played, I mean went out and drank and did what you do when you're in your early 20s. And the process of playing clubs, getting a following, there's stress in that. And then you go to this different level where you're about to get a record deal. There's the stress in that. And, back then it was a big deal. You get a record deal, that's a 1 in a million chance. Okay. So part of the work's done. Then you got to make that record. You got to try to make a great record. And then you got to hope that somebody hears that record. So lots of stress being in a band and relationships with everybody. And in the process of making that record and having a great following and getting to make a record with Peter Walsh and having Tony Visconti do strings for that,
Wow.
spending time in London, coming back, and then the record not doing what we had hoped it would do, and watching our A&R guy was fantastic, and he really championed us. But that's one guy in a very big corporation. EMI is massive, right? It's a worldwide massive thing. And we started second guessing ourselves. So there's stress in that. Like, what didn't we do? You know, we got to be more like Guns N' Roses, or we need to be more like these other bands that are having some success. So as we started making our second record, our bass player quit. So that was, and I don't even remember there being like fights or arguments. He just lost, I guess, faith, as we all did to some
Yeah.
extent. And then we started changing members left and right. That didn't help. So, and everyone that came and went, they were all fantastic. It just, the chemistry really, really changed. And after the tour to support our second record, the drummer and I, Michael Murphy, we had become closer. So we were, you know, kind of brothers in arms. And we went to Rick and we just said, I don't think we can do this anymore. It wasn't like some big brawl. We did maybe have a couple brawls here and there, but it wasn't at the end. We just kind of said, yeah, I don't, you know, without a plan either. There was no sort of escape plan. It was just like, can't do this. It's like emotionally too much. It was for me anyway. And so that was the end of it. And Rick decided, I guess, not to continue with Lions and Ghosts, and Michael and I didn't continue. And, you know, you're right. Rick, you know, he'd sneeze and get a record deal. And rightly so, because he writes great songs, cool guy. He has great ears for putting together arrangements and songs, and, you know, he's a world-class mixer. It's really sad. Right place, wrong time. I'm not even sure anymore what it was. I feel like Lions and Ghosts, and don't take this the wrong way. I wrote this in an interview I did about a month ago. I say this carefully, but I felt like in some way Lions and Ghosts was a little bit like Big Star in the early 70s. They were a band out of time. So, you know, had Big Star happened in 1978 or 9, they may have been massive because they were this cool sort of singer-songwriter pop band with Beatles influence, which, as we both know now, I mean, the Replacements and all kinds of amazing bands all nod to them. And Lions and Ghosts were huge Big Star fans. But the comparison I want to make is we were a band in the middle of this hair metal thing on Sunset Boulevard. Didn't make a lot of sense. And I don't think that the record company really knew what to do with us. Yeah. And we lost faith in ourselves, sadly, you know, because in retrospect, looking at the whole thing, it's much easier to sort of understand what happened.
But you also did a new single with Lions and Ghosts, and you have a record label that you put out, correct?
That's right. That's right.
Can you first tell me about the record label that you put out?
Sure. I have a label called Sparkle Plenty, and my partner is my now manager, Jeff Keller. And it's a bit of a COVID story too. I mean, everyone's got a couple COVID stories, right? And it was during the pandemic, and I have a home studio, and I got an Instagram message from this guy, Jeff, and he said, hey, I wanted to reach out. I'm a big Lions and Ghosts fan. And I was a kid when I first saw you guys, and I met you and your manager then, Len Fico, and he and I are friends. So I wrote him back, and he was kind of like, what are you up to? Wrote him back. And so we were just going back and forth. It was interesting, this complete stranger, and we just started chatting through Instagram. And at some point he said, hey, are you interested in doing a Zoom session or something so we can just see each other and talk? So I said, okay. So once a week for about a year, we would have a Zoom meeting. We talk about music business, the way it was, the way it is, the way we hope it would be. You know, we were all over the place. And at some point he said to me, he goes, listen, I think we should work together. Would you be interested in having a manager? And if so, like, what are some of the things that you want to do? So we had conversations about that. And then we made a list of things that we'd like to do together. And at the bottom of the list, oddly, was somehow get a little Lions and Ghosts love out in the world, because there was no streaming, there was no nothing at the time. So we both went away, and I think at that time I was working on a soundtrack for a movie, and I just sort of focused on that. And he calls me up about 2 weeks later, and he said, okay, I just wanted to let you know I got you a record deal, and you're gonna start your own label. That's how we're gonna do this. I went, what? Wait, first of all, are there still record companies? Just let me know that. And when you say, my label, what does that mean exactly? He goes, it means whatever you want it to mean. So it was this bizarre blessing, because I could not figure out how to reinvent the wheel, me being the wheel. I'd spent years in bands like you. I spent years playing with other people, which I dearly love. And I love being someone's right-hand man. I don't love having to do the firing, but I like being somebody's partner in crime and helping them realize their thing. And then I spent a long time sort of trying to figure things out. I was in a marriage and coming out of that marriage and trying to figure out, the business was so different, and it wasn't just about, doing little guest bits on guitar. It was like, how do I rethink this whole thing? So that really, Sparkle Plenty really became this new vehicle for me, and it helped open the doors to doing lots of other things. One of those things is the Lions and Ghosts reissue, and a new single, and then a new artist who happens to live in Brooklyn.
I gotta tell you, I'm kind of a mess.
Yeah, Sparkle Plenty is our new label, and it's distributed through Deco Entertainment, which is East Coast, and their ties are all ADA and Warner Brothers. So we're really fortunate that we're this teeny tiny little label, but we have a really loud voice.
Back in the day, we'd go to clubs to see great talent and define, but do you go looking and try to?
Well, the first thing was I had met this artist. His name's John Broder. He lives in Brooklyn, and he has a band called Bird Streets. And he'd done his first record with my friend Jason Faulkner, so I'm sure you know who Jason is.
Jason Faulkner was Jellyfish, and my guy who I play in the band with time to time, Eric Dover, replaced him.
That's right.
Jason's incredible.
He's such a great musician, and there was a moment he was going to be in Lions and Ghosts all prior to the
thing. Wow, I didn't know that.
Because Jason and I had become friends, and in between the two Lions and Ghosts albums that were on EMI America at the time, we sort of were rethinking what our sound was and what our whole thing was. And we realized we were going to bring in some new blood. For one, we needed a new bass player because Todd Hoffman had left during the recording of the second record. So I think we all scrambled, and Rick scrambled and brought in some of his friends that he was hoping to work with. And Jason and I were friends, and I'm like, if Jason was in here, the sky's the limit, because we've got a lot of new ideas. So yeah, it was, it's interesting how many people we both know.
Totally.
And that scene, I started thinking about this the other day, because you brought up something about what was going on when Lions and Ghosts was in that scene. And the scene really was about Sunset Boulevard mostly, right? That's where the signings were happening. That's where all the real rock and roll stuff was happening. I mean, rock sort of made this lively comeback out of the ashes of new wave. So it was a funny transitioning period. And Lions and Ghosts really didn't fit in anywhere, because we didn't look that much different than the hair metal bands. Maybe we looked a little more like you mentioned Red Cross. I would say I think we were aping Stones and all that other stuff that was happening at, you know, that sort of later 60s period. The thing that I was thinking about, and I've talked about this a little bit more recently, it's really strange that there was all these, besides the hair metal thing, besides the post-punk and slightly goth thing, besides the punk rock thing, besides all these things, nobody was very competitive. Everybody was really supportive. It was not uncommon to, you know, for Tracy Guns and I to be sitting there talking about guitars and stuff, and we still do actually. But, you know, Lions and Ghosts used to open for Guns N' Roses. We also opened up for Love and Rockets and Gene Loves Jezebel, The Alarm, and The Church. So we were kind of all over the place. And I think about this, it's like we're out and about, we're putting up our flyers like you do. You put up the posters on the telephone poles, handing out the flyers at the concerts and stuff. You know, every one of those bands was all doing it. And it was all kinds of love. It was like, okay, we all want record deals. We all want to get out there in the world, right? And it seemed like every other night that I went somewhere, somebody was getting signed. It was a feeding frenzy at that point. We played with the Guns N' Roses at the Roxy one night. And that very night, they got signed to Geffen.
Wow.
And I remember talking to the guys afterwards, and we're sort of reflecting. It was a good show, big audience, and Guns N' Roses were doing really well. Lions and Ghosts had a pretty good following too, so it was a nice bill, right? And I remember telling the guys, I said, you know, I feel it. It's coming. I don't know how or where, but our time is almost right. I don't know, a month or two, we had MCA and EMI both bidding for us to come sign with them. So it was an interesting time, and it's maybe that time is gone. I don't know. And when you're looking for new stuff, like we were just talking about, I can circle back still. I do look on YouTube and I do look in other places. And my manager's really great about, he's always out there fishing. My thing, it's usually somebody turns me on to someone, and I look for new music all the time, but I mostly look at stuff that is recently signed or is just putting something out. I met the guy from Bird Streets from a Facebook mention. John was coming to town right before the pandemic, and he needed a guitar player. So my friend just sort of, you know, did the little mashup thing there on the mention. And so John and I started talking, and John's like, I'm a big fan of yours. I love the stuff you did with Aimee Mann. And that sort of circle of people. Would you be interested in playing a show? So we met, we hit it off. We own all the same records. We listened to all the same kind of stuff. And we played a show right before the pandemic, and we started working on some music at my studio. And so we continued to make music through the pandemic. And right before the pandemic, he was also working with Pat Song from Wilco. So he's making a ton of music with everybody. And as we were coming out of all this craziness, and my manager said, you can do whatever you want. I said, I really want to put out a record by this guy. He's an amazing songwriter. He has some great people playing on his record. I mean, he's got Jody Stevens from Big Star playing drums on some of it. I enlisted Aimee to play bass, Aimee Mann to play bass on some songs. I did a song with Michael Penn and him singing together. All kinds of crazy stuff. So I think I touched on all your questions just ever so briefly.
That was Mr. Michael Lockwood. If you want to see this episode in its full content, unedited, uncut, join our Patreon VIP Backstage Pass. Until then, everybody, check it out. Playlist, click on the box right here for some other great episodes. And remember, subscribe, hit the bell to be notified, and give us a thumbs up. It's free to do that. Now, remember, kids, it's only rock and roll, and we like it. Until then, who loves you, baby? We do.